Margaret Whitmore had served Ashford Manor for 30. Long enough to watch little boys become fathers. Long enough to see little girls walk down the aisle in gowns she had once helped choose. She remembered birthdays no one else remembered. She knew which servants secretly sent money home to aging parents. She could tell from the sound of footsteps whether the Duke had returned from London. To most people she was simply the housekeeper. Quiet. Always there. Perhaps that was why no one ever stopped to imagine what life looked like once she stepped beyond the manor gates. The scandal began on an ordinary afternoon. Rain tapped softly against the tall library windows, while the household accountant reviewed records from 7 previous years. At first it seemed like a minor discrepancy. Then another. Small withdrawals. Never large enough to raise alarm. Never reckless, but over time they added up to a figure impossible to ignore. Within hours whispers spread through Ashford Manor faster than the servants carrying tea trays through the corridors. Someone had been taking money from the household accounts. Someone who knew exactly how to avoid suspicion. Someone trusted. People lowered their voices when Margaret entered. Conversations stopped when she passed. Even those who had worked beside her for decades avoided meeting her eyes. By evening everyone seemed to have reached the same conclusion. Who else had access to the accounts? Who else managed the household expenses? Who else could have done it? Margaret. She was polishing silver in the dining room when a young maid approached nervously. Mrs. Whitmore. Yes, dear. Margaret noticed. She folded the cloth neatly beside the silver tray. Thank you. She had crossed these corridors thousands of times. Yet somehow that evening they felt unfamiliar. When she entered the library, Duke Edward stood near the fireplace. The accountant remained beside a desk cluttered with papers. Several senior staff members lingered in silence. No one smiled. No one offered her a chair. Margaret, Duke Edward began quietly. Money has gone missing. I know. These withdrawals span nearly 8 years. I see. Do you have any explanation? You cannot explain. Mrs. Whitmore, that's hardly an answer. We trusted you. Duke Edward stared at the woman who had tucked blankets around him after nightmares when he was a child. The woman who had stood beside his mother through illness and grief. The woman who had corrected his manners before his first formal dinner. He wanted to believe there had to be another explanation. Margaret, he said more softly. Please tell me the truth. There were tears gathering there. Not from fear. Not even from shame. Only exhaustion. I'm sorry, Your Grace. Was not a confession. Yet it wasn't a denial either. What are you sorry for? He asked. Margaret's voice remained steady. For disappointing you. Your Grace, surely that's enough. If there's something I don't understand. The room fell silent. For 32 years, Margaret Whitmore had never raised her voice. Never argued. Never spoken out of turn. But there was something in her expression that evening that Duke Edward had never seen before. A deep weariness. As though she had been carrying something far heavier than anyone realized. Did you take the money? He asked at last. Margaret looked directly at him. Then after a long pause, she answered. Yes. Someone muttered that they had known it all along. Another servant lowered her head in disappointment. Duke Edward's face went pale. He had expected excuses. Denials. Anything but that simple answer. Why? He whispered. Margaret swallowed. Sorry, Your Grace. But she only shook her head. I can't tell you. You've served this family for 32 years. Yet when she spoke, her voice remained calm. I never meant to hurt Ashford Manor. Then he slowly straightened his shoulders. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed. No longer personal. Only formal. Margaret Whitmore. Several servants gasped. The young maid who had fetched Margaret burst into tears. Still, Margaret neither argued nor begged. She simply bowed her head. I understand, Your Grace. No thank you speech was given. No acknowledgement of 32 years of loyalty. The following morning, Margaret packed her belongings into a single suitcase. As she walked through the front doors of Ashford Manor. For the last time, servants watched from windows and corridors. Some looked ashamed. Others relieved. No one stepped forward. No one stopped her. At the top of the staircase, Duke Edward stood hidden in the shadows. He watched as the woman who had been part of every chapter of his life climbed into a waiting carriage. Just before the door closed, Margaret looked back at the manor one final time. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Only sadness. Then the carriage rolled away. And for the first time in more than 3 decades, Ashford Manor felt empty. For several days after Margaret left Ashford Manor, Duke Edward convinced himself that he had done the right thing. Rules existed for a reason. Trust once broken came with consequences. At least that was what he kept repeating to himself. And yet the manor no longer felt the same. Dinner arrived late. Fresh flowers disappeared from the drawing room. The cook forgot that the Duke hated rosemary. Servants argued over things Margaret had once handled without anyone noticing. For the first time in his life, Duke Edward realized how many invisible pieces of Ashford Manor had been held together by one quiet woman. Then, 2 weeks later, the accountant returned carrying an old wooden box. "Your Grace, I think you need to see this." Every bill had been carefully organized and dated. At the very bottom lay a medical file. As Duke Edward continued reading, the truth unfolded piece by piece. Margaret's daughter had died years ago. Thomas had been diagnosed with leukemia shortly afterward. Margaret had sold her jewelry. Sold her late husband's belongings. But eventually the treatments became impossible to afford. And when faced with the choice between saving Ashford Manor's money and saving the only family she had left, she chose the little boy. Tucked inside the box was a letter addressed to the Duke. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The next morning he traveled to the small seaside town listed in the documents. He found Margaret sitting outside a modest cottage while a pale little boy slept beneath a blanket nearby. She looked tired. But when she saw him, she still stood respectfully. "Your Grace, I'm sorry. I believed the records before, believed the woman who practically raised me. We all fail each other sometimes," she said softly. "Not as a housekeeper." Duke Edward established a foundation to help every employee facing medical hardship, ensuring that no one would ever have to choose between honesty and saving the person they loved. As for Thomas, he recovered. Years later, when someone asked the young man who his hero was, he didn't mention kings or dukes. He simply smiled and answered, "But the people who quietly sacrifice everything for those they love are the ones the world remembers longest." If Margaret's story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were Duke Edward? And if you believe loyalty and kindness should never be forgotten, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable royal stories filled with compassion, regret, and justice.